Ancient glyphs speak truths, too jagged for daylight. Not forward, not back, down, always down. Into the mall with Cecilia Hunt.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Into the Maw with myself, Cecilia Hunt. So today's episode is going to be about Apepian versus Apophian. So there are two paths that focus on Apep or Apophis from ancient Egyptian mythology. And today we're going to be going over the similarities and the contrast of these two paths. So before we get into that, I want to ground us in the ancient world itself, so in mythology itself, because without understanding how the Egyptians themselves saw Apep or Apophis, it can be very difficult to measure how later paths, like the two that we're talking about today, align or diverge, right? So when we talk about Apep, we are talking about the great serpent of chaos, destruction, and unmaking in ancient Egypt, right? So the manifestation of the force Isfet, which is the opposite of Ma'at. Apep is known notoriously for relentlessly attacking Ra's solar bark in the Duat every single night repeatedly, only to be restrained by gods like, Set or Mehen, or typically it's Set, but there are other ones that make appearances or help and aid as well. Spells in the Book of the Dead protect the sun and the soul, both, from Apep's influence and attacks, right? So he's never fully destroyed, he's never permanently defeated. He comes back again and again and again and again because he is immortal, he is inevitable, he is eternal. That is the whole point, right? Because the ancient Egyptians didn't see him as evil in a modern sense, as how we think about, feel about, or perceive good versus evil today. They did see him as a necessary adversary whose opposition kept Ma'at and the cosmic order strong and reliable, right? So when we think about Isfet versus Ma'at, you really have to think about why it was so crucial that he never be permanently killed. Why couldn't they just, boom, one done, be done with it, right? Well, it's because the cosmic order had to remain strong. It had to keep, being pushed and uplifted and upheld, and without that opposition you don't have anything for the Neteru, which are the Egyptian gods, to really push against in order to uphold the laws of Ma'at. So one of the most striking examples that we have is in the Book of Overthrowing Apep, and it's not just like a random book either. It's literally like a hands-on ritualistic manual that the ancient Egyptians used to use. So priests would spit on him, curse him, bound him, stab him, burn or destroy effigies every day. But it was because Apep was not just a story. He was real, he was ever present, and he was a very true threat to not only cosmic balance, but also to life as they perceived it itself, right? That tension and chaos was both dangerous and essential. And that really shapes how we understand who Apep is today. And some modern systems reduce him to a destructive archetype, or like the void or the abyss archetype, or even just straight chaos, right? And then some reclaim him as a living sacred force, not necessarily to be worshipped, but also not evil, but as something to be like faced, honored, and understood because of what he represented and what he stood for, right? So in today's episode, we are going to explore the differences between Apophianism and Apepianism. And we'll go over things like practitioner experiences to psychological and spiritual stakes. We'll even discuss a little bit on cultural context and cultural appropriation, different types of engagement, and ultimately what it means to walk and be transformed by the Serpent of Isfet, Apep. So let's go down, always down into the maw. Okay, first we're going to start off with the difference in practitioner experiences. Okay, so Apophianism and the Apophian path often uses Apep archetypally. Okay, so like visualization and invocation, he's more of an archetype or a symbol rather than a real entity or a physical being, right? Where the Apepian path or Apepianism is very much more devotional and relational. So they recognize him as a real being with actual agency, rather than just a symbol or an archetype. Apepianism is more like a reclamation project that avoids reducing Apep to a symbol borrowed from Kemet, and rather they leave him where he is. So they leave Apep within his ancient Egyptian context, within his cultural identity, and they really research, study, dive deep, and get to the heart of who, what, where, when, and why, from where he is. They don't remove him and just give him a static binary role in an archetype position. While Apophianism leans into that symbolic extraction. This is an important distinction. This is an important distinction for you guys listening, especially if you are one that is big on decolonial awareness or cultural appropriation, right? And I understand that a lot of chaos magic and a lot of like anti-cosmic Satanists and so on and so forth, they work a lot with archetypes. They do things symbolically or archetypally. A lot of them can be, atheists, which is fine. So they work more with the symbolization or the story and the meaning behind the story rather than they do the physical entity, right? Which again is fine, but it's all about how you do it and why you're doing it, in my opinion, because there is still that risk of cultural appropriation if you are not, researching, if you're not going in deeper, if you're not really getting to the root of who, what, where, when, and why, and understanding what it is you're actually, calling on or working with or yada yada. Because even if you're just, taking him and using him as an archetype for, say, chaos, right? If you're not going in and looking and researching into why is he chaos? What kind of chaos was he? Was he like mindless chaos, or was he organized chaos? Was he patient? Was he stealthy? Or was he just absolute destruction no matter what? Like, these are important distinctions, especially when you are working with an element as, chaotic as chaos, right? Because a lot of things can go wrong really fast. So that is where the cultural integrity and recognition comes in. Like, this is a really important part and a really important distinction between the two paths. because Apophianism, they often extract Apep from his historical and spiritual context, using him as that symbol or symbolic current in a westernized left-hand path framework. This approach can slide into cultural appropriation as it's rarely engaged deeply within the ancient Egyptian cosmology or ritual. So, again, it goes back to, if you're not doing that research, if you're not really putting in the time and energy and effort, and you just want to use the symbology of something and completely remove it from its cultural context and make it into a static binary that fits for your purposes, then that reaches into that cultural appropriation, right? Because you're not doing what is required in order for you to be respectfully working with that entity or even their symbology, right? And it's a very fine line, especially when, you're looking into anti-cosmic Satanism or even draconianism. Like, a lot of people that practice these paths do so with symbology, and it is possible to be atheist and practice these, because that's you can work with the symbology of dragons, you can work with the symbology of chaos, you can work with the symbology of certain deities. But when it comes from an ancient culture, when the deity that you are working with comes from an ancient culture or an ancient mythology or Africa, okay? Like Apep is an African deity, you guys. You have to remember that. Apep is an African deity, okay? And he's not even really a deity, so let me correct that really quick, because I need to nip that in the ass really quick. He's not even really a deity. He is a cosmic force, okay? So in today's modern day and age, we can often refer to him as a deity, but within his cultural context, he's not a deity. He is a cosmic force of chaos, destruction, injustice, and just entropy, basically, right? So it's really important that if you are working with a being like Apep archetypally or symbolically, do the fucking research necessary to understand what it is, okay? That's all I'm asking, please. Like, you can work with the symbology, you can work with things, archetypally, that's fine, but please don't remove it from its cultural context. Don't, tear it out of where it came from and just make it a static binary, singular fucking thing, right? Because that's really when you can put yourself in a dangerous situation, because not only is it, disrespectful, but you're also underestimating what it is you're working with. Like, if you're only expecting it to be chaos, that's cute. That's cute, right? Because what do you mean you only expect it to be chaos? Like, chaos is so many different things, right? And so many things can go wrong when you underestimate something so massive and so ancient. And just, even if you do practice Apophianism, I am in no way, shape, or form trying to say that Apophianism or being Apophian is wrong or incorrect. I'm just trying to, advocate a little bit, to still do your research and still, make sure that you are being respectful of the thing that you're fucking working with, right? Apepianism, on the other hand, when it comes to cultural integrity and recognition, it's rooted in Kemetic reconstruction and scholarship, but it's also rooted in the Kemetic demonolatry, okay? Which I know they're not called demons. I know, I digress, okay? Just bear with me. But it doesn't seek to claim ownership of him or remove him from that cultural context, but rather to restore his sacred role within the balance of Kemetic thought itself. So while fusing it with draconian initiatory practices, Apepianism is like a reclamation of reinterpretation. So it's not a reconstruction, right? Because that would just be preposterous, because that would, entail that people did it in ancient times, right? It's not a reconstruction, but it is a way to work with Apep, whether you want to do it symbolically, metaphorically, or archetypally, or literally and physically and spiritually, it doesn't matter. It keeps him in that cultural context, and it really fuses together the Kemetic thought with the draconian path, right? So it's like a fusion of the two so that you can properly and safely and respectfully work with this ancient, chaotic ass fucking serpent without having to really remove him, okay? Now, cultural appropriation is a really important layer to weave into this, again, right? Because it strikes at the ethics behind how or why people approach or interact with Apep to begin with. So cultural appropriation happens when Apep is stripped of his Egyptian context and treated like a generic or static binary Karen monster. A chaos monster. That's what we see a lot in Apophianism, or even pop culture, where Apep gets flattened into the role of Egypt's Satan, or the Egyptian Satan. But Apepianism avoids appropriation by keeping him within his cultural framework, which, yes, can be paradoxical, but he is viewed as the Serpent of Isfet, feared and cursed, but still sacred and ritually central to Kemetic practices. You don't need to worship him to respect him, right? So if you choose to work with or interact with Apep, you don't have to worship him. Just because you work with him does not mean that you worship him. Just because you respect his place in the cosmology does not mean that you fucking worship him. But you do need to treat him in ways that don't erase his roots, okay? So that's really, really important. We can always do another episode on cultural appropriation and Apep if you guys would like that episode. Make sure that you're joined into Apep's Abyss, which is linked down below in the description of this episode. That way we can that way you can help choose and vote on episodes and ask questions, etc. But again, you have to do this in a way that does not erase Apep's cultural roots. And I cannot stress that enough, because I even see Kemetics themselves, whether they're Kemetic Orthodox or Reconstruction or Kemetic Pagan or Kemetic Polytheists, Kemetic Revivalists, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. I see Kemetics all the time themselves erasing the roots and the historical legitimacy of Apep, which is very dangerous, okay? I can't stress that enough. It's very dangerous, because Apep is something that is so massively important and central within the Kemetic cosmology. Like, he's there for a fucking reason, and it just baffles me how many Kemetic practitioners don't actually understand the cosmology around Apep or the cosmology around Isfet. And they themselves oftentimes just, slap a, static binary on Apep and put him in a little tiny box and say that's all he is and kick him to the curb. And anybody that even tries to talk about Apep or writes Apep's name or speaks his name or whatever, they're automatically like screamed at or yelled at or disowned or shunned or whatever. Like, they're treated like absolute fucking trash for asking simple questions about Apep, right? Or if they're not treated like trash for asking the Apep questions, they oftentimes get answers that are very dry, very flat, very, he said, she said kind of answers. Which a lot of Kemetics, I have noticed, tend to lean towards, oh, he's just a monster that wants to destroy the world, and I wish we could just get rid of him, yada, yada, yada. That is bordering erasure, okay? Because if you cannot acknowledge the importance of him within the cosmology or the mythology or even the history of ancient Egypt, right? Then it's very difficult to comprehend why he's so important, but it's also, it just frustrates me, guys. It frustrates me because I have spent so many years studying this shit, studying this guy, right? But ultimately, when Kemetic practitioners are guilty of saying things like, oh, we're not supposed to talk about Apep. Oh, we're not supposed to acknowledge Apep. Oh, we're not supposed to, do this or that or that or this, aside from, the obvious, you don't worship Apep. They are taking part in erasure of the culture that they worship and work with, all while simultaneously not understanding or comprehending their own cosmology. Because, like it or not, Apep is very crucial to Kemetic cosmology and Kemetic thought. They made Isfet a manifested form for a fucking reason. But enough of the cultural appropriation ramblings. That can be, again, a whole nother video. If you guys want it, let me know in the comments. And make sure to join Apep's Abyss in the details. So we are going to move on to psychological and spiritual stakes of both paths. So the Apophian approach to, the spiritual stakes to Apophianism, excuse me. So now we're going to move on to the psychological and spiritual stakes of both Apophianism and Apepianism. So when we talk about Apophian and Apepian approaches, it's not just about mythological interpretation. It's about how each path affects the psyche and the spirit, okay? And this is really, really important. The Apophian approach, as it's often understood in Western occultism, tends to frame Apophis as the principle of negation. So this is the destroyer of illusions, the dissolver of order, the serpent that devours the sun to reveal the void kind of thing, right? This can be deeply liberating for some people because it breaks down those false identities and conditionings that, if you have a bunch of, religious trauma and shit like that. But there's also the psychological and spiritual risk that when they focus solely on destruction and dissolution, you can slip into nihilism, right? So that's emotional detachment or a kind of cosmic disconnection, where meaning itself to anything seems irrelevant. And in that state, an individual may begin to see all structure, all value, and even selfhood as something to be annihilated, rather than transformed. So it's just it's like going back and forth, right? Because it can be very beneficial for some people, and then some people, it can absolutely destroy you, right? Which a lot of left-hand paths are like that. It's not an uncommon trend. A lot of them are like that, right? It's all about balance and grounding and finding something or someone to help you, again, really ground yourself and stay present in reality. So the Apepian approach, though, takes a different stance. So this accepts that chaos and destruction are essential forces necessary for existence, but it doesn't glorify dissolution for its own sake. So Apep is not seen as the end of all things, but as a force that tests and renews through that opposition, okay? So that's a very important distinction. Because within this view, the Serpent's chaos, which is Isfet, exists in constant tension with Ma'at, okay? So it goes off of that, Egyptian thought or the Kemetic cosmology. So the principle of balance, truth, and order are in constant tension. It's like that, it's like walking a knife's edge, basically, right? Like, some people can do it, some people can't. So instead of falling into I can't fucking talk. Instead of falling into that meaninglessness, Apepianism emphasizes transformation through balance, right? So you have to balance that knife's edge. You have to balance both, the order and the chaos, not just focusing on the chaos, right? You have to really focus on why they rely on each other, why it's the yin and the yang kind of thing, right? That balance comes with its own psychological and spiritual cost, though, okay? So we will go over that. So the risk of Apepianism isn't, nihilism or anything like that. It's intensity. So it's the willingness to face your own personal chaos, your own personal shadow, and internal disorder, okay, of your own, in ways that can completely reshape your identity and your perspective. It's not destruction for destruction's sake, but destruction as a path to rebirth, which again, a lot of people can handle it. A lot of people do great in it. A lot of people thrive in it, but some people just can't. And that's okay, right? Like, if a path's not for you, that's okay. This makes Apepianism inherently, it demands that the practitioners that, work within Apepianism withstand their own internal storms without losing their grounding within the order, right? So you have to be able to withstand Isfet in order to enjoy Ma'at, right? But you're not working with Ma'at, you're only working with Apep. But it's understanding and allowing yourself to embrace those parts of yourself so that they don't disrupt or destruct your life, right? It's really just a process of continual recalibration, embracing Isfet without being consumed by it, okay? So while Apophian approach often ends at the void, the dissolution of all, the Apepian path moves through the void and finds new balance on the other side. One risks emptiness and the other risks becoming, okay? So basically, in short, the Apophian path risks detachment and nihilism through over-identification and dissolution, okay? While the Apepian path risks intensity, and overwhelm through confrontation with chaos, but its goal is to transform within the cosmic balance between Ma'at and Isfet. So, now we are going to move on to Apep's role within both paths, which may seem so far like they're kind of similar, but they're not. Okay. So Apep's role in Apophianism, okay, which you can, look at Apophianism or even systems like the Temple of Set or anti-cosmic left-hand path in general, right? They tend to treat Apep, or Apophis as they call him, as a symbolic force of chaos, rebellion, and anti-cosmic liberation. He is literally used as an archetype of destruction against divine order and a tool for personal deification through detachment from creation itself. So essentially, that means that, like I said, he is an archetype of destruction against divine order in general, right? So that is very much different than, breaking down false orders or anything like that, or falsehoods. It is literally just, seeing him as an archetype of destruction against divine order in general and a tool for personal deification. Apepianism, on the other hand, recognizes that Apep is the embodiment of Isfet, and he's the sacred opposing force to Ma'at. He is not just symbolic, he's an actual entity, an actual being, an actual force with purpose, not necessarily evil, but essential, right? So his role is to unmake, challenge, and dissolve structures, illusions, and false orders. He is the sacred adversary, but not to be worshipped blindly nor conquered, rather walked with, honored, faced, and understood, right? So he doesn't represent detachment from creation, but the darkness around it or within it. So Apep is more so within Apepian thought. Apep is more so the darkness that gives Ma'at her shape. So he is like the darkness that gives the light its shape. So as you can tell already, they are two paths within Draconianism, or within the Draconian current, so to say, and they both work with or incorporate the same deity or the same force or the same entity, but very differently, okay? And especially when we look at the relationship to Ma'at and cosmic balance between the two paths, because this is where you see one of the biggest shifts, right, between the two, because Apophianism tends to reject or bypass Ma'at altogether, okay, seeing order or balance as traps of control or cosmic slavery, okay? It focuses on freedom from all systems. Where Apepianism, on the other hand, Ma'at and Isfet are both sacred forces necessary for survival, necessary for cosmic function, and necessary for, existence, basically. And Apep's opposition to Ma'at is not rebellion for rebellion's sake, but a sacred function of polarity, okay? Because in and within Apepianism, Apep is the necessary unmaker, the breaker of false balance, and the shadow that gives shape to that light, like I said before. Like, his opposition to Ma'at is cosmic, not criminal. Like, it's a sacred tension rather than a war to win, right? That's why he's eternal. He always comes back. He's never fully defeated, yada, yada, yada. And another thing to look at between these two paths, to show their differences, is how they perceive or interact with the chaos itself, right? So it's really like meaningful opposition versus nihilistic void kind of thing. And if you're not familiar with what the nihilistic void is, so the nihilistic void is the idea that nothing has inherent meaning or value, right? Like, so life, the universe, and even concepts like good and evil are just empty. Like, they have no meaning, right? It's a sense that total emptiness or nothingness, where all structure, purpose, and significance are considered meaningless. Like, nothing has meaning. Like, nothing at all. Like, everything is pointless. Who cares? Fuck it all. Like, nothing has meaning, right? So when we look at Apophianism, Apophianism leans towards chaos as an end, like a way to dissolve all structure, entering the void as liberation, right? But Apepianism understands chaos as a sacred force of transformation. Apep's Isfet is not meaningless destruction, it's a surgical unmaking. So it's basically like the necessary annihilation of illusion, right? So chaos here is purposeful, cosmologically grounded, and deeply initiatory. And again, it goes back to what I had mentioned earlier, where, Apophianism is walking into the void, where Apepianism is walking through the void. And it really, ultimately, one of the biggest differences between the two paths is the deity versus archetype, okay? So, again, like we kind of covered before, Apophianism treats Apophis or Apep as a symbol or archetype, like a philosophical mask or an inner concept kind of thing, where Apepianism recognizes him as a real active deity or force, like premortal force of the cosmology, right? He's masculine and vastly powerful, but they don't see him as a metaphor, but a being of spirit and shadow who is approached with reverence, Heka, which is Egyptian magic. And he's not summoned, he's honored from historical, Kemetic perspective, as well as Draconianism. So it's really an interesting path because it does blend the Kemetic thought with the Draconianism instead of removing him from that Kemetic thought to fit within Draconianism, if that makes sense. So when we look at where these paths come from, Apophianism is a Michael Kelly creation, okay? So Michael Kelly is the person most directly tied to Apophianism as a defined system. And Michael Kelly was once a member of the Temple of Set. Eventually, from the Temple of Set, developed his own path, right? And so he heavily incorporated Apep or Apophis. Apophis is an adversarial current, but it's more so like invoked to awaken shadow power transformation and self-sovereignty. And so his approach is ritualistic and mythopoetic, but still not culturally rooted in Kemetic cosmology or history or culture. He blends like Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Western esoterica. So while he acknowledges that Apep is a powerful force, it's within a left-hand path system, not a Kemetic framework, right? So he doesn't really, recognize Apep as who or what he is from where he's from. He rather just, kind of takes that archetype and utilizes that power within his Luciferian and Draconian path. Apepianism, on the other hand, was created by Cecilia Hunt. Hi, how are you? How's it going? Nice to meet you too. Okay. I am the originator of the Apepian Current. It is a spiritual path that fuses Kemetic and Draconian, okay? It's unlike other approaches that treat Apep as a symbol or adversarial mask. It honors Apep as that living divine being, and not divine, but sacred, right? Because divinity and sacredness are two separate things. But it's like it treats him as like the primordial embodiment of Isfet, because that's what he is. And the sacred opposer of Ma'at and the necessary force within that cosmic cycle of creation and unmaking. So it can be a deeply devotional path, but it is really rooted in historical research, communion, and reverent reclamation, okay? Because the Apepian Current or Apepianism is not anti-cosmic or nihilistic, because nihilistic says nothing matters, life has no meaning, or all values are empty, but Apepianism does not reject meaning, okay? It finds meaning through chaos, in the confrontation of that disillusion, that fear, that transformation, while acknowledging that the masculine chaotic forces of Apep as a sacred initiator should be key, okay? Because guiding the one through personal destruction, unmasking, and dissolution and transformation, it's like, why would you not honor who he is from where he's at, right? Some works in Apepianism include Apep Hecatexts, which is a book that you can find on Amazon. It is a scholarly deep dive on the history and mythology of Apep through the centuries of ancient Egypt. And then you have Apep's Abyss and Apep's Serpentarium, and yeah, lots of good stuff, guys. And so Apepianism has a lot to do with the history, the mythology, the culture, and the everything to do with Apep, where he's at, where he's from, the who, what, where, when, and why. Because the who, what, where, when, and why are all very, very important when you're working with something. I cannot stress that enough. Even if you're working with it as an adversary, or as a cosmic principle, or metaphorically or symbolically, like, it doesn't matter. Like, you still should know where it comes from, what it means to the people that it came from, and all that good jazz, right? Because that's how you can make sure that you're not removing something or contributing to erasure or anything like that. So if this episode resonated with you and you want to continue walking with the serpent, there are several ways that you can do so. So down below in the description, you can join Apep's Abyss, which is the best way to connect with our community, ask questions, and even vote on future podcast episodes. You can help shape what comes next, right? So that's always fun, and we have lots of fun in there. There's lots of amazing people in there. For those seeking structured study and ritual practice, Apep Hecatexts, again, you can find that book on Amazon. It's very, very informational, and it's not an occult book, okay? I feel like that's really important to know. It's not an occult book. It's not a spiritual guide. It is a scholarly Egyptological deep dive on Apep within his cultural context, his mythology, and his history within ancient Egypt. Apep's Serpentarium and Apepian Grimoire are also 2 tiers on my Patreon that are available. Apep's Serpentarium on my Patreon is a Patreon tier to learn about the cultural history and mythology of Apep as a scholarly student rather than an occult or spiritual student. And then the Apepian Grimoire is obvious to what it is, right? So it's an Apepian Grimoire, but it's called Apepian Papyri. So those are a couple more options for you guys. But again, joining Apep's Abyss is going to be the biggest benefit if you are interested, because it is where you are going to get the notifications. It's where you can vote, you can take part in conversation, community, activities and rites, rituals, all that good jazz. And there are informational pieces and things that I post within the Discord server that I don't put on, Patreon or anything else. And you have 24-hour access to ask whatever questions you need to in order to help you grow and learn moving forward. And again, there is also the option of the Sanctum of the Abyssal Serpents, which is the official Apepian order that we have within Apep's Abyss. So again, that is a completely optional, route that you can join and you can take. If it is something that you're interested in, we do offer free initiations and free information, a free library, all that good jazz. But I want to thank you guys for joining me today on this beautiful episode of Into the Maw. And until next time, may you face your shadows and embrace sacred opposition and move through the current of the serpent happy, healthy, and beautifully. All right, guys. See you next time.